Welcome. This is the first in hopefully a series of interviews I'll be conducting with various people from the business and IT worlds, looking at the current challenges that we find in the workplace, particularly in response to return to work following the lockdown period. With that in mind, I'm joined today by Steve Ramsay, who runs Harmeston Consulting, who are specialists in large-scale IT change. Steve, welcome to today. How you doing?
Darryl.
Good to see you again. Absolutely. So Steve, based on that, I just wanted to ask you a few questions, really, just to get your views from an IT consulting perspective. Obviously, as we've seen, the lockdown has caused quite a number of challenges for businesses with funding and furlough schemes, etc. What do you see from the conversations you're having as the biggest challenges that businesses and specifically IT and technology programs are having or are going to have with the reopening of markets?
It's a good question, Darryl. I think most businesses, what I'm seeing, sort of talking to my client base, are really focused now on recovery. What is the short and medium term recovery plan going to look like? So they're not really focused on their technology at this exact moment in time. They are predominantly interested in resurrecting their core business. And I think the perceived need for technology change at this time is going to be of limited interest. Now, outside of remote working and mobility, a lot of firms have probably spent an awful lot of money in the short term to get the parts of their workforce or the portions of their workforce that can work from home, that they're not going to have that much interest now in investing. If we look at sort of on a budgetary perspective, I think probably a large chunk of the IT portfolio budget for operational engine lights on work will have possibly been consumed with dealing with the technology side of the crisis. So as an IT director or a CIO at this point in time, I think it's going to be quite difficult getting back to the boardroom to discuss operational engine projects that need to be done by the end of the year, when businesses want to probably invest their money in their recovery or make significant savings because of the impact that the crisis has had.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, very good points. So just taking that a step further, obviously you're a provider of IT consultancy, particularly on that strategy level. If there is, as you say, a focus on the recovery side of things, how does that impact your thinking, and how are you looking to assist and provide a role to businesses to help with that recovery and growth period?
Well, I think actually, if we turn a clock back a few months before the crisis, there was quite a change there around IR35, and therefore a lot of consultancies were offering fixed outcome type arrangements to help firms sort of through the minefield that was the changes from IR35. I think that what firms are really looking at trying to do at the moment, rightly or wrongly, is obviously consolidate their costs at this moment in time. So where we're helping clients really is looking at some of the foundations of change rather than the actual projects themselves. And that is helping them around sort of optimizing their sourcing, looking at how they can get the best out of their current permanent heads before they have to start looking outside of that. Many of them haven't got the money to go out to the contract market or to employ sort of consultancy outsourcing models. They're more really looking for strategic help, looking at expertise around business case and the generation side of things as well. So it's much more on point focused help around decision making, certainly in the strategy place or the strategy area, and as well as about how to sort of use the resources that they've got to deliver the projects that they have to deliver. I think the luxury of some of the business initiatives are out the window at the moment. So it's very much about that strategic lights on area.
Okay, no, great. So obviously, long before we even knew how to spell coronavirus kind of thing, there was very different approaches to digital transformation. And we've heard a number of commentators over the last 3 to 6 months mentioning how this could be a kickstart for many businesses to actually start or continue or refine digital transformation journeys. Do you have any thoughts around this, particularly about what challenges we will see?
Well, I see it in two ways. Digital's a big term, isn't it? I mean, define digital. I think if either you're a provider of digital services or you're a consumer of them, or you're both. But if we look at it from a provider's perspective, it's definitely around data. It's definitely around consolidation of the data, the taxonomy, and the data models that needs to be thought of. Obviously, if you are a consumer of digital services, and I say that sort of in the broadest sense, I think cloud services have been embraced and extensions to mobility have been embraced during the crisis. So I think firms are far more aware of their capability now. If we just look at O365 and what you get for your money there, you've got all sorts of firms from small and medium sized right up to the big behemoths, all sort of buying into that type of setup now, which is great to see. But I think also as well, what the virus has sort of prompted in terms of technology, though, is a bit of a knee-jerk fractured state as well of companies that hadn't really embraced a single strategy for mobility, have had to rush out and subscribe to things like Zoom and so on and so forth. And we're on a Zoom call now. It just shows how quickly they've sort of come into focus. But I think there's a lot of mobile cloud solutions out there that people are consuming that I think once the dust settles, they're going to look at that strategically and have to make a decision as to whether or not they want to continue this sort of fractured state, or they want to employ things like Teams and bring that back to a Microsoft house.
I just think, just on that bit, I mean, obviously you mentioned there about the technology side of things there and how quickly people have had to react to this. Obviously, this does then raise up the kind of cultural aspect to this in terms of, remote working and how that will change or continue within the marketplace once we get to, get out the other side. Do you think that there will be a need for more investment in the infrastructure, whether that be cloud or whatever? Or how do you see that change happening?
I think if we look at that culturally to start with, rather than sort of in investment terms, I think there are individuals out there, team members out there that thrive in that team environment, being able to stand up at their desk and catch someone's eye and talk to them directly. The old coffee room piece is really, really, really valuable. I'm working with a client at the moment. We were having that discussion this morning of now we're into sort of trying to arrange meetings to try and have conversations that we would have had by just standing up, waving my arm and saying, "Do you have 2 minutes to talk to me about X?" Yeah. But I also see that there are also on the other side of that plenty of people that are living their best lives, who are at home, they're working, they're very comfortable in that environment, and because their commute is no longer, they are really taking that time to go out and they're riding their bikes, they're running, they're out walking the dog, they've got more time with their family, and they are in, dread to say it, almost enjoying the situation from their own personal experience. And I think firms are going to have to think, if they are culturally aware, they're going to have to think about those elements in terms of getting that balance right. There are project teams that will benefit from being together, and there are other teams that could quite possibly be sort of working from at home and fractured. And there are obviously, from an investment perspective, that there's cost savings there in terms of reducing their actual physical footprint. And from that, then I do think there will be further investment in mobile technology, absolutely, as it comes through. It's forever changing. The retail market tends to lead the way these days. You can see sort of the biggest and brightest things coming through, and there are exciting things coming through, even from some of the tried and tested, the Apples and the Samsungs. There is always, interesting technology coming down the stack that assists home working, assist people that want to live in that bracket. So I think there is an opportunity. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No, you've got to think about the real estate aspect of that. But I do think over time, then companies might be able to do away with a lot of their lease costs in terms of footprint and be able to reinvest that to get that balance right. I think now is the time actually that we could be looking at that sort of revolution in working that we've always been always talking about work-life balance, where someone's been ticking the box at a company because it's the right thing to say to your staff. Well, actually, it might be the time now to address that. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, great. Absolutely. So with that in mind, do you have any tips for actually approaching these type of transformations in terms of strategy?
Yes, I think if everything comes back to, I think really a baseline, and that's a really strong, solid, commercially viable strategy. It's massively important. I've seen plenty of technology strategies in the past that are just essentially a shopping list for IT departments, and they sound and they look great in principle, but actually you've got to consider the commercial viability of those, especially the bigger the firm, the greater the amount of technical debt to overcome as well. So I think that's a key area there, is around addressing your technical debt and the strategic change element and bringing that together. Because if you've got a really strong strategy and you understand where the business is heading and how you're going to support that in your technology strategy, you really are in the best position to generate a strong business case for each element and understand your ROI and understand what benefits you're bringing through technology back to the business. I think also as well, I just mentioned it earlier, optimizing your sourcing is a key area. There used to be an old cycle where technology would change, an element of the staff would be retrained, an element would be made redundant, and then there'd be new hires or consultants and contractors coming through the door. But the speed with which technology changes now, that model can't be cost effective anymore of redundancy and rehire. Got to really look at the skills of the people that you've got. In Sweden, it's a really good model there in terms of they look at things like, if you're a manager, it doesn't matter what you're managing, but you can manage people. You can manage people in any environment. And I think we need to sort of look at that in terms of people that you've got working in your current old technologies. What skill sets do they have? Because you could retrain them and move them into the new technology piece. And those types of decisions, that analysis needs to be done before we start looking at contractors, consultants, or outsourced consultants, I should say, and also as well looking at actually hiring. Look after your internal team first, understand what they're capable of doing, and then obviously invest in them and then move them into that position. There will always be gaps. This is not sort of the be all and end all of it. There will always be gaps, and there is obviously a role to play for systems integrators, for companies of that ilk, and for contractors for that matter, to come in and do very specific things for you for that fixed outcome. Is key. But before you make that decision, you should really understand what your internal team are capable of doing and what what is your strategy for that team. And when I'll go back to the start here, talking about that, part of that strategy should be your strategy for your people as well. It's not just a technology strategy, it's a strategy for how technology is going to support your business and what, the people that are going to support that as well.
Yeah.
And I think sort of lastly there, it's around the contracting side of it, the safeguarding. It's always been a bit of a bugbear of mine that there comes a moment in time when a systems integrator and a client are sort of aligned, and usually at the signing of the contract, and then normally through a lack of pragmatism, a lack of flexibility, then we end up in a situation of disharmony where the client is trying to make changes to the fixed outcome. The third party is obviously not keen and wants a change request and doesn't want to take a financial loss. And it's a very, very tricky area. I mean, once you pull the contracts out, you are in trouble. So it's about having those upfront negotiations and trying to instill a degree of pragmatism into that negotiation and flexibility into the contract to allow all parties to move around depending on changes to requirements and changes to scope. So it's a big area. I'm not a lawyer, but certainly I think it's something that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. So just on that last point there around the kind of contract side of things, do you feel, from your perspective, you're a business owner providing IT consultancy. How do you see opportunity for yourself? Do you see this as being more kind of long-term strategic engagements, or do you feel that it's based on your thoughts there about actually looking internally for the capabilities within your team and then growing forward from there? Do you believe that it will be a much more of a paradigm shift to having shorter, sharper engagements on perhaps a more frequent basis?
Good question, Darryl. I think the days of the large outsource consultancy are over, and I also think that the government aren't going to give up with IR35. So I think that having swathe of contractors on site is also, I don't think we're going to return to that either. So I do think firms are almost sort of faced with having to consider what they do with their staff, and also as well sort of getting that foundation in place to be able to deliver. So I think where I'm sort of positioning myself and Harmeston at the moment is around those trusted advisory services to help clients to shape the strategy and shape all the points I've just mentioned, to be honest with you, to create an environment where they can be successful in their delivery of change. It's about legacy, really. Let's face it. If you're bringing in a management consultancy, you want to come in, add value, leave you with something that the company can grow off of. So I do see it being short, sharp engagements. I do see it being about maximum amount of value delivered as quickly as possible, really, to enable that business then to take that advice and shape it and instill that within their own organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question from me, Steve, and it's just to park the IT consideration just for a second. What do you feel businesses could do to try and help themselves on this recovery path? Is there any other approaches that they could look at?
Well, I can only really talk about my own experiences in this particular instance, and that is, at the moment, we've been quite lucky, I suppose, during the crisis. We've still managed to grow the business. But one thing that we have, and we have been really sort of hot on, and my board have been pressing me on, is about multi-channel openings. So it's about considering that there is more channels available to you these days to market and to sell that are just it's not the old one of the phone call and the email anymore. It really is that there are multiple channels that can be utilised, and I think because of that, from again, like a cultural aspect, a human aspect of that, I do believe that having multi-channels means that there is multiple different personality types on the other end of those channels. So if we dial the clock back, and I'm going to show my age now, we dial the clock back, say, I don't know, 20, 25 years, then, it was all about the sales call. It was all about getting in front of the client and having that face-to-face conversation. Now, we all need to get there at the end of the day. But actually, we need to address that in different ways. And so utilising those multi-channel openings is something, as a small business, has really helped us to keep going and to grow the business during the crisis. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah. Is there any other final thoughts that you had or any other points you'd like to make, Steve, on any of the topics that we covered?
I do think that it's certainly very interesting, unprecedented times that we live in. Absolutely. And trying to grow a business during this has been probably one of the most difficult things that I think I've ever undertaken. And my heart goes out to my wife and to the board members and everybody that's been involved over the last few months. And but I do think that I do try and see that the silver lining on every single cloud. And I do think that you know, from a technology perspective, what the crisis has shown us is that we can work, we can remain connected, and we can still be productive without having to come together in one building. And I think that to me is key, in that, you know, certainly in recruitment, I have been saying this to some of our sort of our more regional clients about, you know, it used to be you were constricted by your regional resourcing market, but now you can get talent from all over the world, you know, and have that, you know, on call whenever you want it, and draw down on that as well. And so I think from my perspective, from a resourcing perspective as well, I think it's a really interesting time that businesses might be able to make permanent hires from all over the place now, rather than having to come to their local market. And so I think it's going to be quite a competitive permanent hires market, I think, coming out of this. And I think that's going to really create some quite interesting dynamics within teams. And certainly it's only going to assist companies like mine when we are offering advice and offering guidance on some of the key topics as well, having sort of that type of open network to be able to tap into, and also as well utilising the same open network that hopefully our clients are going to be utilising in the future.
Yeah, I think that's key, actually. I mean, you mentioned there about not being limited. You know, this concept of a global village. You know, it's very much an opportunity for wholesale change. You know, this has to be the ability to reset in certain areas. There are obviously going to be companies that were doing very well before this, but there will be companies that had some challenges anyway. And, you know, this will hopefully prompt everyone to just take some time just to reset, look at where the options are. And it may well, by design, with a few tweaks, actually open up further opportunity in different market spaces and stuff like that. So I think, you know, what you said there about, you know, opening up the pool of talent, not restricted on geography. There will be different mindsets that come into that play, and we'll obviously have a different leverage within the market to actually open up channels. So I completely agree with that. It's been great. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed your points. Some really great ones there. Just leaves me to say, if anyone's taken the time to look at this, get involved in the conversation. Drop either myself or Steve a message, leave a note in the comments. It'd be great to get different views on the topics or new topics that we've covered today. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again, Steve. And we'll talk to you very soon, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.